In the shadow of the grand kingdom of Valor, young Aidan gazed out over the bustling marketplace. The streets were filled with the rich and poor, each person chasing their own dreams and struggles. Aidan, an orphan, had learned early on how to navigate the world with nothing but his wit and courage. His days were spent working for scraps in the market, and his nights under the cold, starry sky, dreaming of something more. "You'll never amount to anything," the merchant said, his voice filled with disdain, as Aidan offered his last copper for a loaf of bread. Aidan didn't flinch. He had heard those words too many times. He knew that someday he would prove them wrong. With a final glance at the merchant, he turned away, determination in his eyes. "One day I will be the wealthiest man in this kingdom," he whispered to himself, clenching his fist. Days turned into weeks, and Aidan's resolve only grew stronger. He had become a fixture in the marketplace, working for every coin he could get his hands on. One day, as he worked under the hot sun, a wealthy nobleman approached him, intrigued by his work ethic. "You there, boy," the nobleman called out. "You have the look of someone who isn't afraid of hard work. Come with me." Aidan, shocked by the attention, stood up and wiped the sweat from his brow. "What do you want with me?" he asked, his voice cautious but curious. "I'm in need of a boy like you," the nobleman said, smiling. "Someone who knows how to work and who isn't afraid to take risks. You'll be in my service, and I'll make sure you get the opportunities you deserve." Aidan's heart raced. This was the chance he had been waiting for. He had nothing to lose and everything to gain. "I'll go with you," Aidan said, stepping forward. Aidan followed the nobleman through the winding streets of the city, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never imagined that someone like him, a lowly orphan, would be given an opportunity like this. The nobleman's mansion was even grander than he could have ever dreamed. "Here, boy, you will have the chance to prove yourself," the nobleman said, gesturing to the vast courtyard where servants were busy cleaning and preparing the estate. "You will begin in the kitchens and learn what it means to work in my house. Show me you're worthy, and I will give you more." Aidan nodded, barely able to believe the turn of his fate. "I won't disappoint you," he said, his voice steady, though his mind was racing with the possibilities. The nobleman smiled and walked away, leaving Aidan alone in the massive kitchen, feeling both awe and fear. He was finally getting a chance to change his life. Days turned into weeks, and Aidan worked tirelessly in the nobleman's mansion. He rose before dawn and worked well into the night, learning everything from the intricacies of the kitchen to managing the estate's finances. But with every passing day, Aidan became more aware of the underlying tensions between the nobleman and his rivals. "You're clever, boy," the nobleman said one evening as they sat together in his study, a glass of wine in hand. "But you must understand that power isn't just about working hard. It's about knowing when to take risks and who to trust." Aidan listened intently, hanging on every word. "One day, you may have to decide who you are truly loyal to, me or someone else. But until then, your path will be what you make of it." Aidan's mind swirled with the possibility of gaining wealth and power, but the nobleman's words stayed with him. Who would he become in the end? What would it cost him? Months passed, and Aidan's rise within the mansion was swift. He moved from the kitchen to managing the nobleman's finances, overseeing the flow of money that passed through the estate. One day, the nobleman called him into his private office. "You've done well, Aidan," he said, his voice low and measured. "But I think it's time to test your true potential." Aidan stood tall, his eyes fixed on the nobleman. "What do you mean, sir?" "I have a business opportunity that requires someone who knows how to handle risk and manage wealth," the nobleman explained. "I'm giving you a chance to invest in the kingdom's most lucrative venture. If you succeed, you'll be richer than you ever imagined. Fail, and you'll lose everything." The weight of the offer hung in the air like a storm cloud. Aidan's hands clenched, but his voice remained calm. "I'll take the risk," he said, determined. "I won't fail." Aidan's new venture proved to be as risky as it was rewarding. For weeks he worked tirelessly, overseeing the investments the nobleman had entrusted him with. "This is it," Aidan said to himself one evening as he looked over the financial ledger. The chance I've been waiting for. The business venture was growing, and with every successful deal, Aiden felt his wealth and power beginning to grow. But with power came danger. As Aiden navigated the political and financial landscapes of Valor, he realized that trust was a rare commodity. "You're becoming quite the man of wealth, Aiden," the nobleman said one evening, his voice dripping with approval. "But remember, not everyone will play fair." Aiden nodded, understanding that the game he was now playing had stakes much higher than he had imagined. "I know, sir," Aiden replied. "But I intend to play to win." With the growing wealth came growing enemies. One evening, as Aiden walked through the market, a figure stepped from the shadows. "You're playing a dangerous game, Aiden," the voice said. Aiden turned sharply, his hand instinctively going to his side, where a dagger rested. Standing before him was a rival merchant, his eyes cold and calculating. "I'm not afraid of competition," Aiden said, standing tall despite the looming threat. "But I'd advise you to be careful who you make enemies with." The merchant chuckled darkly, taking a step closer. "You think you've won the game, but the rules are always changing." Aiden's mind raced, but his expression remained calm. "I'm not afraid of change, and I'm not afraid of you," he said with quiet confidence. The merchant smirked before vanishing into the shadows, leaving Aiden to contemplate the true dangers of his newfound wealth. Despite the threats, Aiden's business flourished. He quickly became one of the wealthiest men in Valor, but he didn't forget where he came from. One evening, he visited the orphanage where he had grown up. The building, though worn, still held memories of his childhood. "I've come to help," Aiden said to the matron of the orphanage, his voice warm. She smiled at him, though her eyes betrayed a hint of concern. "Your success has been impressive, Aiden," she said, "but don't forget the people who helped you when you had nothing." Aiden nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I won't forget," he said. "I owe my success to the kindness of people like you." With that, Aiden made a generous donation to the orphanage, ensuring that the children would have a brighter future. He walked away from the building, knowing that no matter how rich he became, he would always remember where his journey began. Aiden's wealth continued to grow, but so did the enemies he made along the way. One night, as he prepared to close the accounts for the day, he received an urgent message. The nobleman had been poisoned. Who could have done this? Aiden asked, his heart racing as he read the note. Jax, his trusted ally, stepped forward. "There's a traitor among us," he said, his voice grim. "And we need to find out who before they strike again." Aiden clenched his fists, anger bubbling inside him. "This ends now. We will find who is behind this, and we will make them pay." He stood, determination in his eyes. "No one betrays me and gets away with it." The investigation into the poisoning led Aiden down a dangerous path. He uncovered a web of lies, betrayal, and deceit that reached deep into the heart of Valor's elite. "It was the rival merchant," Aiden said, his voice steady as he confronted the man in his lavish home. "You were behind the nobleman's poisoning, weren't you?" The merchant's face twisted in anger, but he didn't deny it. "You were getting too powerful, Aiden," he sneered. "You were a threat, and I couldn't allow that." Aiden stepped forward, his eyes cold. "You should have thought of that before you crossed me." With one swift motion, Aiden had the merchant arrested, his network of enemies unraveling before him. As the merchant was taken away, Aiden stood tall, knowing that this victory was just the beginning. Months had passed since Aiden had taken control of the rival merchant's empire. His power and wealth continued to grow, but with every step forward, he felt the burden of responsibility weigh heavier. One evening, as he reviewed his business dealings, a letter arrived from the royal palace. It was an invitation to meet with King Aldrich, the ruler of Valor. A meeting with the king? Aiden murmured to himself, his heart racing. Jax, ever the loyal companion, stood at his side. "What do you think it means?" Jax asked, his voice filled with caution. Aiden paused, his eyes scanning the letter. "It means I finally caught their attention," he said, a smirk playing at his lips. "And I intend to use it to my advantage." The letter was an opportunity, an invitation to the highest circles of power. It could change everything. Aiden arrived at the royal palace the following day, his heart pounding in his chest. The palace gates loomed ahead, and the lavish stone walls stood as a symbol of the power that awaited him inside. As he walked through the grand halls, his steps echoed, making him feel small despite his newfound wealth. A servant led him to the king's throne room, where King Aldrich awaited. The king, a tall man in his mid-50s with graying hair and sharp features, sat on a golden throne, his gaze sharp as he studied Aiden. "You're the orphan who has become a wealthy man," King Aldrich said, his voice regal. "Tell me, Aiden, what is it that you want from this kingdom?" Aiden bowed respectfully before the king. "I want power, your majesty," he said, his voice unwavering. "And I want to make sure the people of Valor are never ruled by fear again." The meeting with the king went better than Aiden could have hoped. King Aldrich, though initially skeptical, was intrigued by Aiden's vision. "You have ambition, I'll give you that," the king said after a long pause. "But power is a dangerous game. You will need allies, not just wealth, to succeed." Aiden nodded, understanding the king's meaning. "I know, your majesty. I've made my share of enemies, but I am prepared to take whatever steps are necessary to secure my place in this kingdom." King Aldrich's lips curled into a faint smile. "Very well. I will offer you my support, but you will owe me, and be prepared to make sacrifices." Aiden agreed, sensing that this was his opportunity to truly rise to the top. "I'll do whatever it takes," Aiden said, his eyes locked on the king's. "You have my word." With the king's support, Aiden's position in Valor's elite circles solidified. However, he quickly realized that the cost of his newfound power was greater than he had anticipated. As he expanded his business empire, Aiden found himself drawn into a web of political maneuvering and moral compromises. One evening, while walking through his estate, Jax approached him with a concerned look on his face. "You've become a powerful man, Aiden," Jax said. "But at what cost?" Aiden looked at his loyal friend, the weight of his decisions settling on him. "I knew the risks," Aiden replied, his voice steady. "But I will not let anyone take what's mine, not anymore." Jax sighed, his expression filled with concern. "Just be careful, Aiden. Power has a way of changing people." Aiden looked away, his mind already focused on the next move. "I will do what I must," he said, walking away. Aiden's empire continued to expand, but with it, the dangers grew. One evening, as Aiden walked through the lavish gardens of his estate, he was approached by a mysterious figure cloaked in shadows. "You've come far, Aiden," the figure said, his voice low and dangerous. "But your power is built on the backs of those you've betrayed." Aiden's heart raced, but his face remained calm. "Who are you?" he demanded, stepping forward. "Someone who's been watching your rise," the figure replied, stepping into the light. It was the merchant he had once defeated, the one he thought was gone. "You think you've won," the merchant sneered. "But I have allies everywhere, and you'll pay for what you've done." Aiden's hand instinctively went to his side, where a dagger rested. "You should have stayed away," Aiden said, his voice cold. "Now you'll regret coming back." The merchant grinned, disappearing into the shadows once more. Aiden knew then that the game wasn't over. It had only just begun. The warning from the mysterious figure echoed in Aiden's mind as he made his way back to his estate. The merchant he had thought vanquished was still lurking in the shadows, and now it seemed that he had even greater power at his disposal. "We need to find out who he's working with," Aiden said, pacing in his private study. Jax, his ever-faithful ally, stood by the door, arms crossed. "It's not just about power anymore, Aiden. It's about survival. The moment you show weakness, they'll strike." Aiden stopped pacing, his gaze focused. "I will not be outplayed. We'll find them before they find us." A plan began to take shape in his mind, a move that would strike at the heart of his enemies before they had the chance to retaliate. "Prepare our forces, we move at dawn." The dawn arrived with the promise of a new chapter in Aiden's life. The kingdom had grown restless as whispers of Aiden's power spread, and he knew it was only a matter of time before his enemies would move against him. "The plan is set," Aiden said, his voice steady as he addressed his most trusted lieutenants. "We strike at their weakest point, their finances. If we cripple their resources, they'll have no choice but to bow to us." Jax nodded, his face grim. "It's risky, but it's the only way to hit them hard enough to make them back off." Aiden's gaze swept over the room. "There will be no turning back. This is the moment we've been preparing for." The air in the room grew tense, as each member of the team knew that this mission would decide the fate of the kingdom. The operation began under the cover of night, with Aiden's forces silently infiltrating the enemy's financial strongholds. "This will cripple them," Jax said quietly, his voice tinged with urgency. "But we need to move quickly." Aiden nodded, his mind focused on the task at hand. He had orchestrated the operation down to the smallest detail, but even the best-laid plans could go awry. As they moved deeper into enemy territory, Aiden couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "Stay alert," he whispered. "We cannot afford any mistakes." The weight of the mission hung heavily on him as they approached the heart of the enemy's wealth, the vaults where their treasures and resources were kept. As Aiden's team breached the vaults, they found the treasure they were after, but the enemy was waiting. "A trap," thought he. The air grew thick with tension as the doors slammed shut behind them, and armed guards poured into the room. "It's a trap," one of Aiden's men shouted. Aiden's heart raced, but his composure remained intact. "Fight through it," he ordered, his voice calm but commanding. He drew his sword, preparing for the battle that was now unavoidable. "No retreat. We take what's ours, and we leave no one standing in our way." The clash of steel and the shouts of soldiers filled the room as the fight for control of the vaults began. Despite the surprise ambush, Aiden's forces prevailed, emerging victorious in the vaults. The enemy had been dealt with, and their resources now belonged to Aiden. As he surveyed the spoils, he couldn't shake the feeling that the tide of the war was shifting in his favor. "We've done it," Jack said, standing beside him, his voice filled with awe. "This is a turning point." Aiden nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. The king's words echoed in his mind. Power was a dangerous game. "We've won a battle," Aiden said, his voice distant. "But the war is far from over. We must stay vigilant." He looked at Jax, his eyes determined. "This is just the beginning." Aiden's empire had expanded, and with it, his influence over Valora's wealth and politics. But as he looked out over the city from his grand estate, he couldn't shake the feeling that danger lurked just beyond the horizon. A letter arrived one evening, its seal bearing the royal crest. The king had summoned him. "It's time," Aiden said, his voice filled with both anticipation and caution. Jax, who had been with him through every step of his journey, raised an eyebrow. "What do you think this meeting is about?" Aiden shook his head. "I'm not sure, but I know that the king will not be interested in a partnership without strings attached." Jax nodded, his face grim. "Just be careful. The more powerful you become, the more enemies you'll have." Aiden clenched his fists. "Let them come. I won't be intimidated." The royal palace was a labyrinth of marble halls and golden chandeliers. Aiden walked with confidence, though he couldn't help but feel the weight of his own ambition pressing down on him. When he entered the king's private chambers, King Aldrich was sitting at a massive wooden desk, surrounded by scrolls and letters. The king looked up, his sharp eyes assessing Aiden. "Ah, Aiden, the young orphan who's risen higher than anyone could have imagined," King Aldrich said, his voice calm yet filled with an unspoken challenge. Aiden bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty, it is an honor." The king smiled, but there was something calculating in his gaze. "I've heard much about you, and while you have proven yourself, you must understand that power comes at a price." Aiden stood tall, meeting the king's gaze. "I understand, Your Majesty. I am prepared to pay whatever price is necessary." After the meeting with the king, Aiden felt both a sense of accomplishment and a growing unease. As the king had implied, power was a delicate thing. On his return to the estate, Aiden found Jax waiting for him. "What did the king want?" Jax asked, his eyes searching Aiden's face for any sign of unease. "The king wants to make sure that I know the risks of power," Aiden replied, his voice guarded. "He offered me his support, but I'm certain there's more to this than he's letting on." Jax raised an eyebrow. "Aiden, you've already made enemies. Be careful not to make more." Aiden's mind raced as he considered the king's words. "I'll play the game," he said quietly. "But I will not be played." The sound of his words echoed in the silence between them. Power was a dangerous game, but Aiden was more determined than ever to win. As the weeks passed, Aiden's empire continued to grow. His wealth, power, and influence stretched far beyond what he had ever dreamed. But even with all his success, he found himself questioning the price of it all. One evening, as he walked through the grand hallways of his estate, Jax approached him with disturbing news. "There's been a rebellion forming in the outer regions," Jax said, his voice low. "The people are restless. They see you as a threat, Aiden." Aiden stopped in his tracks, his heart racing. "What kind of rebellion?" he asked, his voice tense. "One led by the people who believe you've become too powerful," Jax explained. "They've seen you rise and now they want to tear you down." Aiden's jaw tightened. "They'll regret it. No one threatens what's mine." He turned away, determination in his steps. "Prepare the army. We'll crush this rebellion before it can spread." The battle against the rebellion was swift and brutal. Aiden's forces crushed the opposition with precision, but the cost of the victory weighed heavily on him. As he surveyed the battlefield, he saw the bodies of both the rebels and his own men lying in the dirt. "This is the price of power," Aiden whispered to himself. Jax stood by his side, his face grim. "You've won, Aiden. But at what cost?" Aiden didn't answer. He stared out over the battlefield, his eyes distant. "I've taken what I wanted," he said quietly. "But I fear I've lost myself in the process." Jax placed a hand on his shoulder, offering silent support. "You've done what needed to be done. But remember, Aiden, power comes with a price. Don't let it consume you." The kingdom of Valor was still recovering from the rebellion, and Aiden's mind was preoccupied with the aftermath. His wealth and influence had grown beyond his wildest dreams, but the violence of the rebellion had shaken him. "I've won, but what have I truly gained?" he asked himself as he sat in his study, the evening light filtering in through the grand windows. Jax entered, his face hard with concern. "Aiden, you've built an empire. But at what cost? The rebellion was just the beginning. There are still factions who want to tear you down." Aiden sighed deeply, his eyes filled with conflict. "I know, but how much longer can I keep this up? Power always demands more, and I don't know if I'm willing to give it." Jax placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's not about whether you're willing to give it up. It's about whether you can control it without losing yourself." The following day, Aiden attended a council meeting in the royal palace, his thoughts heavy with the burden of leadership. King Aldrich, now a mentor of sorts, had asked for his input on a new political alliance. "You've gained much, Aiden," the king said, his voice measured, "but alliances are just as important as wealth. If you want to keep your position, you need to make powerful friends, not just enemies." Aiden nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I understand, Your Majesty," he replied. "I've seen the consequences of making enemies, but what if the alliances come with their own dangers? What if they ask too much of me?" The king's gaze softened. "Every decision comes with risk. But if you want to hold power, you must be willing to risk everything." Aiden remained silent, the weight of the king's words settling in his chest. Aiden spent the next several days in deep thought, wrestling with his growing influence and the reality of his position. He had built an empire from nothing, but now he faced the ultimate test. Could he balance his ambition with his conscience? As he walked through the royal gardens, Jax approached him once again. "You look troubled," Jax said, his voice filled with concern. Aiden paused, his hand resting on the garden's stone wall. "I don't know if I can keep playing this game, Jax," Aiden confessed. "The more I gain, the more I lose. What if there's no end to it? What if I end up just like those I despised?" Jax looked at him, his eyes steady. "You have the power to shape the future, Aiden, But you can't do it alone. You have to choose who you are and what you want your legacy to be. Aiden looked out over the vast gardens, the future uncertain before him. Maybe it's time I start choosing. As Aiden mulled over his options, an unexpected visitor arrived at his estate, Lady Isolde, a powerful noblewoman from a rival family. She entered his study with the grace and confidence of someone who is used to getting what she wanted. And I've heard much about your success, Aiden, Lady Isolde said, her voice smooth. And I think it's time we had a conversation about the future. Aiden studied her carefully, sensing that this conversation wasn't as simple as it seemed. What do you want from me, Lady Isolde? He asked, his voice measured. It's not about what I want, she replied, leaning in closer. It's about what we can accomplish together. You've made enemies. I can help you make alliances. True alliances that will solidify your position in the kingdom. Aiden's mind raced as he listened, knowing that every alliance came with strings attached. I'm listening, he said, his eyes narrowing as he considered her offer. The conversation with Lady Isolde was a turning point for Aiden. He knew he was at a crossroads. His decisions would determine not just his future but the future of Valor itself. Over the following weeks, he forged new alliances, each one more complicated than the last. But as Aiden navigated this new world, he began to question his own motivations. Was he seeking power for the kingdom, or was he seeking it for himself? One night as he stood overlooking the city from his estate, Jax approached him. You've made your choices, Aiden, Jax said quietly. But do you still remember why you started this journey? Aiden looked out at the city, his thoughts a whirlwind of ambition and doubt. I remember, he said softly, but I wonder if I've lost my way. As the dust from Aiden's rapid rise settled, he found himself standing at the precipice of everything he had worked for. The kingdom of Valor now felt smaller, its politics tighter, its people more restless. One night, as Aiden walked alone through the gardens of his estate, he thought back to the days when his ambitions were just a whisper in his heart. Is it worth it? He whispered to himself. Is this all I ever wanted? Jax, ever loyal, appeared at his side. What's troubling you? He asked, noticing the tension in Aiden's shoulders. I've built an empire, Jax, Aiden said, his voice heavy. But I feel like I'm losing the man I once was. Power doesn't feel as satisfying as I thought it would. Jax stood silently, watching his friend, knowing this was a moment of reckoning. It's not too late to change, Aiden, Jax said quietly. You still control your destiny. Aiden turned to face him, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Then it's time for a new beginning. Aiden's decision to reshape his future became clearer the more he reflected on his past choices. He decided to use his wealth and power to benefit the people of Valor, but not through manipulation or fear. One morning, Aiden addressed a crowd in the central square, his voice strong as he stood before them. I have built my wealth from nothing, Aiden began, his eyes scanning the gathered crowd. And I've used that wealth for my own gain, but now I will use it to serve the people of Valor. It's time we build a kingdom not based on power, but on unity and prosperity for all. The crowd, which had once been skeptical of his rise, now looked at him with cautious hope. Aiden continued, I vow to work for you not as a ruler, but as a servant of this kingdom. Together, we will reshape the future. The crowd cheered, but Aiden knew this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but it was a road he was ready to walk. In the weeks that followed, Aiden worked tirelessly to implement his vision for a more equitable Valor. He established schools, built hospitals, and implemented fair wages for the workers who had built his wealth. But not everyone was happy with these changes. Lady Isolde, once his ally, approached him one evening with a stern look on her face. You've gone soft, Aiden, she said, her tone laced with disdain. The people don't care about your charity. They care about power, wealth, and status. Aiden met her gaze, unflinching. I disagree, he said calmly. The people care about fairness, about opportunity. I've learned that wealth means nothing if it's not used to improve the lives of others. Lady Isolde scoffed. You've made a mistake, Aiden. You've given up everything you fought for. Aiden shook his head, his resolve unwavering. I didn't fight for power. I fought for a better future. And that's what I'll create. As Aiden's new initiatives began to take root, the kingdom began to change. The people, once skeptical, now saw the tangible benefits of his actions. However, the power struggles within the elite were far from over. One night, Aiden received an urgent message from King Aldrich. The king, though supportive, had his own vision of how the kingdom should be governed. "You've gone too far, Aiden," the king wrote. "The nobility is losing control. If you continue down this path, there will be consequences." Aiden read the letter with a heavy heart. He had expected pushback, but not from the king himself. The next morning, he went to the royal palace to meet with King Aldrich. "I've done what I believe is right," Aiden said, standing before the king. "But I won't let you stand in the way of progress." King Aldrich's expression hardened. "Then you are no longer my ally, Aiden," he said coldly. "You are my rival." The rift between Aiden and King Aldrich marked a new chapter in Aiden's journey. He had the support of the people, but now he had to face the full force of the royal family's power. As Aiden returned to his estate, Jax met him at the gates. "What now?" Jax asked, his voice quiet but filled with concern. Aiden looked out over the city of Valor, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. "Now we fight for what's right," Aiden said, his voice firm. "I will not back down, not now, not ever." With that, Aiden turned away from the gates of his estate, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. "I started with nothing," Aiden muttered, "but I will not let the kingdom fall back into the hands of those who care only for power." And with that, the final chapter of Aiden's journey had begun.